Welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we peel back the smiling facade spruced up by politicians and dive deep into the brutal realities kicking the working class right in the wallet. This is Boss Economics, where we're not just serving facts, we're carving up economic lies with a chainsaw. Today's episode will give you the bitter truth behind America's so-called booming economy, the epic struggle of ordinary folks like Kirsten Ishak, who works as a substitute teacher, and her husband, a retailer employee. They're not unemployed, not sitting around waiting for handouts. They've got jobs, they're hustling hard, but guess what? They can't make ends meet. And if you thought high inflation only hurt the poor, you're dead wrong. Hunger is coming for the middle class. How did we get here, and what does it mean for the economy at large? Buckle up as we expose the tangled web of bad policy decisions and inaction that dragged us into this mess. First things first. We can't talk about hunger without mentioning inflation. Let's look at the facts, the ugly ones, not the polished nonsense at press conferences. Prices have been ramping up by almost 23% over the last 5 years, and no, this isn't your standard inflationary rise of 2 to 3%. Grocery prices alone. They've gotten a whopping 28% bump, according to the latest data as of December 2024. And for the families I'm talking about, this price surge comes after wages have largely stagnated, leaving households scrambling. Ishak and her husband, with 2 incomes, are now regulars at the food pantry. Think about that. Middle-income, employed families are standing in line for food. How in the world did we let this happen? What we're witnessing right now is more than just regular old inflation. It's supercharged inflation, and a big culprit behind it is not just COVID or supply chains, but government policy. Yes, the pandemic threw a curveball, but Washington lobbed in a grenade. When the government dumped roughly $5 trillion in stimulus into the system between March 2020 and March 2021, it did help prevent a full-on collapse. I'll give them that. But what happened next? Consumers had cash and started spending like crazy, only problem? The economy wasn't ready to meet that demand. The system was broken, strained, and under extreme pressure. But wait for it, what did our central bankers do? The Fed kept interest rates nailed to the floor, almost zero, pretending the price increases swirling through your grocery bill were transitory. Honestly, transitory might just be the most laughable excuse for economic mismanagement in years. This wasn't a minor oversight, it was a historic failure in judgment. Now, Professor Andrew Levin from Dartmouth says it best, the Fed failed to carry out its mandate of fostering price stability. Their delay in reining in inflation allowed pressure to build up like water behind a dam. Today, families are drowning in rising prices. The problem hasn't gone away simply because the Fed finally woke up and started raising rates. Here's a fun yet horrifying stat for you. In December 2024, consumer prices did slow down a bit, only up 2.9%. Smells like relief, right? Not quite. Because that's still above the wage growth for most Americans. Remember, the cumulative effect of price rises over the years means many families haven't yet recovered from the 23% jump in the cost of living. In fact, hunger in America has hit households making over $100,000 to $150,000 a year. If that doesn't set off alarm bells, I don't know what will. According to research from Feeding America and the Capital Area Food Bank, it's not just low-income families anymore, it's a broad swath of middle-class Americans who are now food insecure. Why? Let me put it plainly, wages aren't keeping up with these cost-of-living spikes, and the hollowing out of real income is devastating families. So now what? The people in charge, the Federal Reserve and other policymakers, are at a crossroads. They've painted themselves into this mess. If they keep up with high interest rates, they risk cooling off the labor market even more. Translation, fewer jobs, slower wage growth, and guess what, people get even hungrier as their paychecks stagnate while prices march on. On the flip side, if they cave to political pressure or the usual Wall Street chorus, and start slashing interest rates too fast, inflation could come roaring right back. It's an economic game of Russian roulette, folks, and no matter where the Fed points the gun, someone's getting hurt. But the consequences of not doing enough, or doing too much, are devastating. If people don't get the raises they need to keep up with costs, or if inflation creeps back in, food banks and pantries will be stretched to a breaking point, trying to serve an ever-growing crowd of Americans that are spinning in the inflation vortex. Here's where it gets even bleaker. For food banks across the country, needs have exploded. Look at the Flagstaff Family Food Center in Arizona. In 2015, they served around 127,000 meals for the entire year. Last year, they were doling out over 40,000 meals a month. Think about that. And while food banks have adapted, their resources haven't kept pace with demand, which is why you've got families like Ishak's who, even with jobs, are relying on charity to scrape by. Across the U.S., food pantries are getting slammed by increasing numbers of people who used to be comfortably middle class. Just look at the 64 million meals distributed by the Capital Area Food Bank in Washington, D.C. last year. And who are they seeing lining up? More and more people making $100,000 a year or more. Can you believe that? That's right, folks who are supposed to be doing just fine are now on the brink of food insecurity. Food banks were originally designed to serve the most vulnerable, the unemployed, the homeless, but today, they've become a lifeline for those deep in the American workforce. And this expanding demand strain further speaks to just how inept and disconnected our economic leadership has become. They've turned America, the so-called richest nation on earth, into a place where even having a good job doesn't guarantee you can skip a trip to the food pantry. Here's where policymakers made a dangerous miscalculation after the pandemic. They assumed robust GDP growth and a return to full employment would solve everything. But GDP isn't everything. You can have a growing economy with low unemployment, but if the cost of living is insane and wages aren't up to par, guess what? You've got massive economic dysfunction. President Trump won in 2024, riding a wave of discontent, pointing fingers at the gutting of middle-class purchasing power. His campaign harped on inflation ruining kitchen-table economics for families all over America. So where are we headed? You've got the brains at the Fed sitting around, nervously eyeing interest rate decisions and trying to balance stability with some wage growth. But even inside the Fed, there's division brewing. At least 4 officials at their last meeting signaled they don't want to ease borrowing costs any further yet. It's like heading to Vegas and picking red or black at the roulette table, they know they're gambling with the entire economy. By December of last year, the Fed still forecasted inflation reaching 2.5% by 2025, missing their 2% target for a 5th straight year. In layman's terms, buying power will keep eroding unless wages somehow catch up, or inflation is fully squashed. It's a mess of conflicting goals: spur economic activity or crush inflation. The bottom line? If the Fed cuts rates too much, we're back in the inflation doom loop. If they keep them too high, you better buckle up for more unemployment, wage stagnation, and, guess what? More hunger. What does this all mean? We're living in a broken system. Interest rates are, let's face it, a crude weapon. They hit everyone. It's like fighting a sniper with a grenade. What we actually need is targeted fiscal policy. We need reforms that directly aid working families, while generating job growth that's tied to actual wage increases, not just speculative stock prices. But in today's America, our leaders seem more likely to argue over whom to blame than actually fix anything. In the meantime, nonprofit food banks and lines of ordinary Joes and Janes will keep growing. People in the wealthiest country on earth, living paycheck to paycheck and lining up for donations just to feed their kids. If you think this ends with some silver bullet, think again. This pain will linger well into the next presidential term and beyond. Our immediate future is one of painful choices, either steeper rate hikes and economic slowdowns, or a softening stance against inflation with the risk of runaway price increases. Joy. But the real nightmare here isn't in just the data points or rate hikes. It's in the Everly family at the Flagstaff Family Food Center, or the worker with a 6-figure income stranded outside a Washington, D.C. food bank after realizing their paycheck doesn't do what it used to. This isn't the American dream, this is the new normal. We, my dear viewers, are in the jaws of a multi-layered, man-made economic crisis. Thanks, federal. Thanks, politicians. Thanks for nothing. Thank you for tuning in to Boss Economics World, where we don't sugarcoat reality. If you like this breakdown of the economic disaster we're living in, go ahead and subscribe, and let's ride through this mess together. Until next time, buckle up, people.